I would like to thank Bobby for helping set this up a long time ago, and Allison, who made all the arrangements here. I'm really substituting for Gretchen here. Gretchen came from Gallipolis, Ohio. This group has been down to Gallipolis too. Don't tell you about things like that. And when she was a little girl, she saw a jacket or coat in the Gallipolis Museum. And she was very fascinated with it. It was a gold coat. Then we moved to this area and lived up in Youngstown. And she discovered that Lafayette, who had worn the coat, because it lost, this is a story I got anyhow, that he had lost some of his belongings in the river on the way to Gallipolis. He was coming up from New Orleans up the Mississippi over. And so she got very interested in the fact that he'd been to the fort too. So she wrote a little book about Gallipolis. It's historical fiction, and we joined the American Friends of Lafayette, which is a society that you'll find out a lot about in a moment. So that's partly the connection that happened here. When I called up Chuck to see if I could get a speaker about this for our Friday morning programs, he said, well, I'll be glad to come. So he's got a very busy schedule. He was teleconferencing between 9 and 10:15 over here in the little office. And he's here today to tell us all about Lafayette. His wife, Bonnie, is over here with him. She's with him. And there's big doings down in Buffalo. In fact, they were on the Seneca Chief yesterday. So I hope you enjoy his talk, and thank you very much for coming. So you're wired.
Yeah, I'm going to shake your hand.
Oh.
And I also want to thank the Doolings very much for having me today, and I also want to thank my wife Bonnie, who supports not only me but what we're doing for Lafayette. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. My name is Chuck Schwam. I'm the executive director of the American Friends of Lafayette. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Are we okay?
Oh, we're getting a little louder, yeah.
Okay. Do something I need to do? No? Okay. And so the American Friends of Lafayette have been around since 1932. We have 1,500 members around the country. And this is our biggest year ever. Because what we're doing is we're following Lafayette's footsteps exactly as it happened 200 years ago as he went around our country on a farewell tour. And we'll talk about that soon. But it's been a busy year. I mean, we pretty much are holding an event every day around the country. He went to all 24 states back in the day. So the reason I'm here today is not only to be with you guys, but guess what happened? 200 years ago today, Lafayette was in Buffalo. So that's why I'm here. There you go. So what's up? Now I'm going to show you a lot of slides today, but I'm going to show you 3 images of Lafayette, my 3 favorites, and probably Lafayette's 3 favorites images of himself. And this is the first one I want to show you. This is probably done in the late 1780s. He's already back from France, back from the United States. The Revolutionary War has happened. And this is Lafayette bragging to the world. And he's bragging about this. And what that is a map of Yorktown. And he's bragging that we won the fight in Yorktown. And he was a big, big part of that. And you can see, oh, wrong button. You can see the American flags back here. There's a little, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a glove on the ground right there. That means there was a conflict of some type. You can turn that down if you want. And he's wearing a full American uniform here. So this is him bragging, hey, we kicked some butt in the United States, and I had a lot to do with that. And he also was bragging about the French involvement. There were more French soldiers at Yorktown than there were American. Lafayette was born in a southern part of France, in Auvergne. Auvergne is a very remote part of France. Not many people visit Auvergne, but it's beautiful down there. And he was born in this chateau, in this room right here, And one of the things you might recognize or find interesting about this photo is this. An American flag flying in front of that chateau since the 1930s. And that's speaking to Lafayette as the genesis between the relationship of France and the United States. The oldest ally we have, our oldest friend, is the country of France. And Lafayette started it all. Lafayette and Ben Franklin, how about that? I'll give Ben some credit there. When Lafayette was about a year and a half old, his father died in the Battle of Minden by a cannonball. And that must have been kind of ugly, probably a closed casket for his father. With that said, he never really got to know his father. His father was always out to battle, and so on and so forth. He really never got to know his dad. Then when he turned about 3, his mother was called to court. And what that means is, Marie Antoinette said to his mom, who was a very prominent landowner in Auvergne, we would like you to come to Paris and be with the Queen. And she can't say no to that. And that's an important thing to know, because at this point, Lafayette's not being raised by his mother or his father. He's being raised by his aunt and his grandmother. And what we want to think about there is, he's being raised by women. And this shapes Lafayette's life in a very important way. And we're going to talk about that in the near future, I promise. So Lafayette's mother goes to Paris. He's being raised by these other two, his aunt and his grandmother. Now, Lafayette was the lord of the land. He was a marquis. And all the people in the village around him served their needs. But they were very good landowners. They were very good to the people of the town of Chavignac. But the thing is Lafayette didn't like that separation. He wanted to be just like all the other boys. And the grandmother and the aunt did invite all the boys from the neighborhood to the castle to play with Lafayette, hang out with Lafayette. He went into town, did the same thing. On Sundays when Lafayette went to church, they all doffed their cap to him. And he didn't understand that, he didn't like that, he just wanted to be like everybody else. When Lafayette turned about 11 years old, his mother wrote him and said, it's time for you to come to Paris and get a formal education. And he did. He came to Paris and he lived in this terrible place called Luxembourg Palace with his mother. And there he got a formal education in France, but unfortunately, about 6 months after he arrived in France, his mother died. Okay? And then his grandfather died. And guess what happens when that happens? He becomes pretty much the richest 11-year-old in history. He's pretty much the richest man in France at this point because of all these people that have died and willed to him. And this is a very important also fact about Lafayette's life. Lafayette's family, men in his family, have always been in the military. His father, all the way back to, I always get this messed up. Thank you, Joan of Arc. Thank you, I love you, Bonnie. All the way back to Joan of Arc time, he had family members, ancestors, descendants fighting for the French. Lafayette wanted to do the same thing. Back in those days, the firstborn son was usually a military person. The secondborn son was usually in the clergy. Lafayette was the only son they had, so he wanted to be a military man. And this is an image of him training with the Black Musketeers at a very young age. Let's go back. All right, so Lafayette is 14 years old, and the Duc de Noailles, another very rich, prominent family in Paris, who also is in court, realizes that this young man is very wealthy and probably would make a great husband and provide a wonderful dowry. Not that the Noailles needed money, because they were also extremely rich. He thought it would be a great idea for his daughter, this one right here, Adrienne, to marry Lafayette. And he pitched this idea to his wife. At the time, Lafayette was 14, she was 12. Mom didn't love that idea. She was a little hesitant and asked if they, at least Lafayette could move into their household, live amongst them, and see what happens. And that's what they did. And at 14, he moved in with them. And after 2 years, they actually did fall in love. And when Lafayette turned 16 and Adrienne turned 14, they did get married. And the Queen and King of France attended their wedding. That's a big deal. Think about that. The king and queen of France attended their wedding. So Lafayette is now part of that court that his mother was part of in Versailles. But how do you think Lafayette felt about eating bonbons and drinking champagne all day? He didn't like that at all. He didn't like that one bit. In fact, at one point, he was trying to learn how to dance, and that night he danced with Queen Marie Antoinette and stepped on her foot and became the laughingstock of France. And it was really traumatic for him. And I don't know if you guys realize, dancing in the 18th century was a big deal. Who do you think the best dancer in America was back then, male dancer? George Washington. He was very well known as being a fantastic dancer. That was important. The other thing that was important was to be a great equestrian, good on a horse. George Washington was probably the best rider in America as well. He was also 6'2", so those things probably helped him become one of our father of our country. But Lafayette, although a good equestrian, a very good horse, was not a good dancer and hated the life in Versailles. So Lafayette was in Metz, eastern France, military training, and he was invited to a dinner. And at this dinner, he was asked to do 3 things. Number 1, don't speak unless you're spoken to. Number 2, be on time. And number 3, keep King George's brother's wine glass full at all times. This is King George III. He was, at the time of the late 1700s, treating America poorly, taxation without representation. And his brother, the Duke of Gloucester, was doing a tour of the United States, complaining about his brother, talking to Americans about their plight and talking to French people, he was touring France, telling the French how horrible it was his brother was treating the United States at the time. Well, it wasn't, the colonies at the time, pardon me. So the Duke of Gloucester was in France, and Lafayette attended this dinner and heard the Duke of Gloucester talking about the tough times that were happening in America. And at that moment, he really found what he thought was his calling. Instead of being in Versailles drinking champagne, he found something that maybe he could tie his colors to, and that was our independence. So Lafayette decided he would try to sign up for the United States Army, the colonial army at the time. And at the time, this man right here, I'll give you, right here, is Baron de Cobb. I'm sorry, that's Celestine. So Celestine was in charge of making sure, in France, sending over good French military men to help out our cause. And he was sending over a lot of people over to George Washington, but George Washington was not happy. George Washington was upset because most of the people he was sending them were there just for the glory. They didn't want to do the work. They didn't want to do anything but collect a paycheck and sit around and have some fun. So at this point, George Washington really wanted to turn off the faucet that Celestine was doing. Celestine didn't realize this, and at this meeting when Lafayette, and Lafayette is a living control senior, Lafayette's right there, Lafayette is asking Celestine if he could become a major general in our army. And Celestine said yes. And this man back here is Baron de Cobb, a very important person, a friend of Lafayette's. He died in South Carolina for our cause. He was part of the Maryland troop, and he also taught Lafayette how to speak English on this boat right here. When Lafayette was decided he wanted to come to America, the king forbid him to do so. He said, no way, you're not allowed to get involved. If you go, we're going to imprison you. His father-in-law said, no way, you're not going to go. His pregnant wife said, go. This is important. Which is an amazing thing when you think about it. She was 16 at the time and pregnant with her first child. So Lafayette had to sneak out of the country. And he had to buy his own boat. And this is the boat he bought, the Victoire. He named it Victory. Think about that. A 19-year-old boy already thinking he's going to win this for us. This is the La Victoire. It was a horrible crossing to the United States. It took him 3 months, which is a long time even back then. The seas were rough. He was either learning English or getting very, very sick. He was very prone to seasickness. So I love this story. So he arrives in South Carolina. He couldn't go directly to Philadelphia, which is where he ended up having to go to see the Continental Congress. He arrives in South Carolina because there's a blockade by the British up in the Northeast. He arrives in South Carolina, and he decides he's going to hire some horses and some carriages, and they're going to have the whole entourage is going to go up to Philadelphia. And on their way up, the horses are going lame, the carriages are going bad, and you read in the diaries of some of his cohorts, hey, America's not so great. The food isn't great, the women aren't pretty, the mosquitoes are bigger than birds. But you read in Lafayette's diary, the women are gorgeous, the countryside is beautiful, the food is delicious. You already can see that Lafayette has fallen in love with our country, and he hasn't even been there a week. He shows up at Continental Congress, and they already know that George Washington doesn't want any more French generals. He shows up, knocks on the door, says, here I am, and they said, we don't want you. Go home. We're not interested. Think about that. That was 3 months of throwing up. That was a lot. And if he goes back to France, he's going to get imprisoned. Well, Lafayette went back to his hotel, freshened up, got a good night's rest, but while he was doing that, a letter came to Continental Congress from one man named Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin said, look out for this Marquis de Lafayette. He's on his way to see you, he's the richest man in France, and he's willing to serve for free. Well, Continental Congress ran to the hotel, knocked on his door and said, welcome, you are now a Major General in the United States Army. Probably the most important day of my life. I wasn't alive then, but it was. Next to the lovely marriage of my wife, our wedding day. But this is the day George Washington met Lafayette, and this is why I'm here today. This relationship between these two men fascinated me. You know, Washington had a certain veneer around him. He had a force field. He didn't smile much. He didn't let people touch him. He always, he even rewrote his memoirs just to make sure they were perfect. He knew, Washington knew that we would be talking about him 250 years later. He knew that. So he was very, very careful. But there was one person that seemed to penetrate that force field, that he didn't care whether or not he was, didn't want to hug or didn't want to be praised. He made Washington smile, and that was Lafayette, and I found that a fascinating relationship. And this is August 3rd of 1777 in the Long Room in Philadelphia, where they met for the first time. Lafayette had been in the country all but 10 days at this point. So, before we talk about the Battle of Brandywine, which is really important, let's talk about the next day. Lafayette and Washington go to see the troops. Washington wants them to review the troops, and the troops are a mess. Tattered clothes, dirty, no discipline whatsoever. And Washington's embarrassed. Washington says, you know what, I'm so sorry, Marquis, can you tell us a little something, how we can do better? And Lafayette said to him, and I think this cemented that relationship, I am here to learn, not to teach. And that's what Washington needed to hear, because up to this point, everybody was telling him what to do. And this man actually said, I want to learn from you. And this started a relationship. Think about it. Lafayette was an orphan, and really never had a father. And then Washington never had his own children. Washington was in his mid-40s. Lafayette was 19. It became somewhat of a fraternal relationship. A relationship, like I said, that I found fascinating. On September 6th, 1777, Lafayette celebrated his 20th birthday at the Hale Burns House outside of Wilmington, Delaware. You can go there. It's still open. It's a great place to visit. He celebrated his 20th birthday, but they did not hold a birthday party for him. They held a council of war. And the council of war was because the British were threatening to take over the capital of the, for lack of a better word, United States, Philadelphia. And the Battle of Brandywine was how they were going to stop that. And it happened 5 days later on September 11th, 1777. So Lafayette's at the Battle of Brandywine with George Washington, and they're up on the hill watching what's going on. And what's going on is really, really bad for the Americans. We're losing terribly. And we're retreating in an unorganized fashion. Things are not going well. So Lafayette says to Washington, please let me go down there and help organize this retreat. And Washington says he can do that. And he goes down there, and this is him helping with the retreat. And then this happens. Lafayette takes a musket ball in the lower right leg. Goes right through his leg. He actually doesn't realize it at first. He sees his boot filling up with blood, and then he realizes he's been injured. Baptism by blood. The thing about it is, though, he still understands that there's a retreat going on, and he helps organize that retreat, and he saves hundreds of Americans. In order to go over this retreat, it was a small bridge that they had to get over, and that was really hard to organize, and he was able to do that, and hundreds of soldiers were saved that day because of Lafayette. When Lafayette went to the hospital, I love this story, he's laying there, and George Washington comes in and says to the surgeon, "Treat this man as if he were my own son." They had known each other, what, at this point, a month. Lafayette was sent to Bethlehem to convalesce, to heal. He was a horrible, horrible patient. He was very impatient. He wanted to come home, go back and join the army at all times. Finally, he did. He joined George Washington at Valley Forge. And think about this for a second. This is one of the worst winters of the history of our country. Lafayette's living in terrible conditions, while all his friends are in France eating bonbons and drinking champagne. One of the things Lafayette did while he was in Valley Forge was he went up and tried to recruit the Oneida Indians. At this point, Native Americans were mostly siding with the British. And the Oneidas were kind of on the fence. And George Washington sent Lafayette up that way to see if he could make peace with them and entice them to join our cause. And Lafayette not only did that, but he forged a relationship with the Native Americans that extended throughout his life. And we'll talk about that a little more later. But he also brought back 200 Oneida warriors to Valley Forge to help with the cause. So we've lost Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia, the British have taken it because we lost the Battle of Brandywine, and the winter's over, and fighting's about to begin again. And Washington decides he wants to send Lafayette up on a giant hill called Barren Hill to look in Philadelphia and see what the British are doing. And he gives Washington gives Lafayette advice: don't set up camp, don't stop anywhere long, make sure you move around a lot because otherwise you're going to get captured. Well, my 20-year-old hero did not follow those orders. He took about 1,300 soldiers and 200 of the Oneidas to Barren Hill and pitched camp at the top of the hill. Well, General Howe in Philadelphia found out about this and started printing invitations to a party to meet the boy general. Think about that. The British were so sure that they were going to capture Lafayette, they started printing invitations to come to Philadelphia to meet him. So, not only was he sure, he also was going to make sure, and he had over 10,000 soldiers come to Barren Hill to try to get Lafayette. And he started surrounding the hill, and the Oneida Indians noticed that. So I noted the Oneida Indians understood the land much better than anybody else. They showed Lafayette a way out, while they were holding the British at bay on one end of the hill. Lafayette, everybody, all Americans were able to leave the hill without ever getting captured or killed or wounded. Unfortunately, that day, 3 Oneida Indians were killed, and they are buried in a church to this day right outside of what now is called Lafayette Hill. There we go. I'm going to skip over that. All right, this is my second favorite image of Lafayette, and this is probably Lafayette's favorite image of himself. And the reason I think this is Lafayette's favorite image of himself is because of several reasons. Number one, George Washington commissioned this painting. George Washington asked Charles Wilson Peale to paint this painting for him. That's number one. Number two, Lafayette looks more like an American here than in any image I've ever seen of him. He's in a Continental Army uniform. He has no medals on. His hair is receding. He's got a little pot belly going on right here. I mean, he's just, I'm an American. I am no longer a French person. And this is what he wanted. And I love this image of him. It's very important. It hangs in the State House of Maryland in Annapolis. Lafayette had 4 children. Unfortunately, their first child died when she was 2. Then she had another daughter, because Lafayette was asked to go back to France in 1780 to drum up more support from the king. So he went back to France. He spent time with his wife. That's probably when they had enough, they started having more children. They had a daughter, then they had a son, and he named him George Washington Lafayette, which is fantastic. And then later on, they had a daughter, and he named her Virginia, after his favorite state of our country, Virginia. In my mind, this man doesn't get enough credit. I think there should be statues in our country. This man lost his head because of us. This is Louis the 16th. He was the man that authorized all the money, the guns, the ships, the troops to come to America. This is who Lafayette convinced. This is who Ben Franklin convinced. As you know, the French Revolution happened because they ran out of money, and they probably ran out of money because he gave it all to us. So I think this is an important guy. I feel like if it wasn't for this guy, fish and chips would be our national food. So Lafayette came back from America and forged that Franco-American alliance, a very, very important alliance. And I couldn't find a real image of them hugging, but I did find a cartoon image of them hugging Lafayette in Washington. There is a diary from a private called Joseph Plum Martin, and in his diary he indicates that Lafayette came out of his tent when he read the mail that the Franco alliance had happened, and he gave Washington a hug. This is probably the second most important French person from that time period for us, and this is General Rochambeau. And Louis XVI asked General Rochambeau to lead the forces to the United States. And this man was a brilliant, brilliant soldier, a brilliant general. He actually outranked George Washington, but he did when he came to the United States, make sure that George knew he was the commander-in-chief. But Rochambeau did counsel George Washington a lot, and we'll talk about that momentarily. So Lafayette was asked to do a very important task. He was asked to take what looks like a very significant part of the British Army and corner them against the Chesapeake Bay here. So Lafayette went into Virginia on March 14th, 1781, and started nipping at the heels of Cornwallis's army right around here. And he never engaged in a major battle. That's what's so great about what Lafayette did. He knew if he had a major battle, he'd lose. But he knew that if he had little skirmishes and he kind of pushed the army east, that's how he would be successful. Oh, sorry. And that's exactly what he did. He moved them east to this point right here. Let me see if I can see it. Right here, Yorktown, right there. So he has Cornwallis bottled up right here. The only escape is the Chesapeake Bay. So Lafayette writes a letter to the Caribbean to an Admiral de Grasse, a man who's overseeing a large fleet of French ships of war, and says, hey, listen, if you come up to the Chesapeake Bay and block the Chesapeake Bay, we have this situation really in a good place. So de Grasse comes into the bay right here. The British ships realize what's happening. They come down, and there's a major battle here in early October called the Battle of the Capes. And the French won, thank goodness. And now we have Cornwallis bottled up. George Washington is in New York City. Rochambeau is in Newport, Rhode Island. George Washington was hoping the theater of war would be in New York. And he'd been waiting years for this to happen, and it never did. So finally, Rochambeau convinces George Washington that they should go down and join Lafayette here in Yorktown. So Rochambeau comes down from Newport, George Washington in New York, and the whole two armies start heading to Yorktown. To this day, that is marked by the Washington-Rochambeau route. It's a very, very interesting thing. You can look it up online. It's actually a National Park Service route from Newport to Yorktown. One more little tidbit I like. Up to this point, it's been 8 years. Washington has never been to Mount Vernon in 8 years. He loved Mount Vernon. On his way down, he did stop at Mount Vernon to say hi to Martha and introduce him to Rochambeau. This is a very controversial image. Many people think this man right here is a guy named James Armistead Lafayette. We dispute that. We do not think that's him. Because he wouldn't have been dressed like that. He wouldn't have been subservient like that. Let's talk about the story about James Armistead. Lafayette is in Yorktown before the siege begins, and he's at the marketplace, and he sees a slave that is reading and writing. He starts a conversation with this slave. Very articulate man. Lafayette has an idea. What if this slave becomes a spy for the American cause? So he pitches the idea to James Armistead, and James Armistead says, This is very dangerous, but I'm going to take it on if you promise to free me when we're done. Now, Lafayette never owned a slave. He didn't believe in slavery. He thought that was a great idea. He agreed with that, and they both agreed to do that. So at night, Armistead would go across enemy lines and infiltrate that night Cornwallis's camp. Guess what happened? General Cornwallis realized, hey, I've got this guy here. He can read, he can write, he's articulate. Maybe he can become a spy. So he goes to James Armistead, says, hey, will you spy on the Americans for us? Could you imagine what's going through Armistead's head? He just became a double agent. Unbelievable. So he goes back to the American side, tells Lafayette what happened, and Lafayette, they must have had a great laugh over this. So guess what starts happening? Lafayette starts feeding Cornwallis bad information. He starts, through Armistead, starts feeding them bad information and getting the right information from Cornwallis. It's an amazing situation, and James Armistead helped our country become free. And I really wanted to talk about that. Now, we got to talk about him a little more later, but for right now, let's stop there. This is a council of war. This is right before the siege. I have Rochambeau, Washington, and back there, right there is Lafayette. That's Hamilton there. And they're getting ready to start the siege of Yorktown. And the siege is kind of similar to what World War I was like, where they built trenches and then bombard the fort. And then at night build new trenches and bombard the fort. And that's what they did. So every day they would move forward until Cornwallis was just getting battered, just completely obliterated. And the only two outposts that were holding right now at this point were redoubts 9 and 10. And these are like mini forts. They had about 50 men inside of them. They were earthen with the spikes sticking out. I forget the name of them, I'm sorry. But anyway, they looked like this. So they knew that they had to take down these two redoubts. So Lafayette was given the honor to take down the American redoubt number 10, but with the Americans, and he asked Alexander Hamilton to lead the charge. And this is the first time Alexander Hamilton has been able to be part of the American Army in a way other than as secretary to Washington. It was a big day for Hamilton. And the other redoubt number 9, was taken down by the French. And they did it at night under darkness with no musket balls in their muskets. In fact, they even took their flints away from those soldiers. All they had was bayonets. They came in silently, and the Americans took their redoubt in 25 minutes. It looked something like this. This is a poor picture only because it looks like it's nighttime, and it looks like it's daytime, and it's actually nighttime. But the Americans took it down in 25 minutes. The French took a half an hour, and I heard there was a lot of joking how the Americans beat the French that day. This is the capitulation. Eventually, Cornwallis had to surrender. We were just, like I said, obliterating them. They had no food, they had no water, they had no escape, and they surrendered. And I'm not going to go into the detail why Washington did not take the sword. This is a man named Benjamin Lincoln. But over here is Lafayette. And notice he's the only one with a red plume. He liked to stand out. See that? Now, this is an important day because guess what happened? When Cornwallis was there and he saw James Armistead on this side of the road, not on this side of the road, Cornwallis realized he had been duped. That Armistead was a double agent, and he topped his cap at him. The war is over. Lafayette goes back to France. It's time for bonbons and champagne? No way. He didn't want to do that. That was not his life. He didn't want to go to that at all. So he decided after 3 years of pondering what to do, he would come back to the United States. And he came back for about 3 months. He visited Lafayette at Mount Vernon. Very famous image of them here. He signed some treaties with the Native Americans during this trip with a very young James Madison. And unbeknownst to either of those gentlemen, this was the last time they would ever see each other. So Lafayette went back to France, and things weren't going well. The treasury was bankrupt. Women were having trouble feeding their families. The country was in a disarray. And Lafayette thought, well, I can help with this. And Lafayette, remember, you know, I forgot to tell you the story. I gotta go back, I'm so sorry. When Lafayette came back to America that first time, came back to France that first time, the king didn't imprison him for a week. in his own home. So he was house arrest for a week. So I wanted to make sure you realize that the king did keep his promise. He did imprison him, but he came back as a hero. What's that?
Wasn't he imprisoned in Versailles?
Yeah, he was imprisoned in Versailles, right? But he came back as a hero. I mean, he came back as a hero. But things weren't going well in France, and he believed in the king. He believed in having a king involved, but he also believed, now that he was a part American, in the Constitution and why that's important. So he wanted to come up with something called a constitutional monarchy to keep the people happy, to repair the country. So the first thing he did with Thomas Jefferson is he wrote this called the Declarations of the Rights of Man, very similar to our Declaration of Independence. And then he came up, and this is an image of him with a new flag. The flag up until now was white. It indicated the king, the roi. He came up with this flag, red, white, and blue, not because of the Americans. I thought so at first, nope. The Paris colors are red and blue, and the white indicated the king. And he invented, the flag we see today was invented by by Lafayette. This is Lady Liberty holding the flag, and this is George Washington Lafayette. And at this point, Lafayette was very, very popular in France, because he was trying to keep everybody happy. But you know what happens when you try to keep everybody happy. We'll get to that in a minute. One of the first things Lafayette did is he dismantled the Bastille. The Bastille was a prison where King Louis XVI sent political prisoners. And he wanted to show the people of France that this was a place that needed to be destroyed. And he did brick by brick with his friends and army, and he took the key to the Bastille and sent it to Mount Vernon for Washington to have. And to this day, that key still hangs in the foyer of Mount Vernon. The women of Paris are really upset. Like I said, they can't feed their family, and they stormed Versailles. Forks, pit, like you see in the movies, every kind of tool they could have, they grabbed and went to Versailles, and you can see them down here. And the queen was really, really, really nervous and upset, and would not come out on the balcony. And finally, Lafayette had her come out on the balcony. Lafayette was the most popular man in France at the time. He kissed her hand and it subdued the crowd for a little bit, but not long. Things got really bad. So Lafayette realized that Robespierre had his eyes on him, and the guillotine was going to be his fate. And realizing that he couldn't keep everybody happy, and now he was making nobody happy, he realized that he had to secure his family and then leave the country. And he did. He secured his family in Schwam in southern France, out of the way. And he fled France. And when he fled France, when he got through Austria, the king of Austria heard that Lafayette was in his country and imprisoned him. And he imprisoned him because Lafayette was not a fan of having a king. And the king thought, well, that doesn't fly with me. I mean, I'm a king. You are somebody that is going to possibly cause harm to me and harm to other kings around the world. And he imprisoned Lafayette for 5 years. And I'm not talking about a country club prison. I'm talking about a terrible, horrible place. A place where Lafayette was given 3 coins every day. And 3 coins. A coin could buy food, a coin could buy a newspaper, or a coin could buy a quill and paper. He could write a letter, he could find out what's happening in the world, or he could eat. And he had to make that decision every day. So, his wife and kids are in Auvergne. Adrienne decides she wants to send George Washington Lafayette to America. Get him out of the fray, have him be with George Washington. So George Washington Lafayette sails to America and is with George Washington in Mount Vernon. Very interesting. And there he's schooled and gets a higher education. Adrienne and the 2 daughters end up going to jail. And luckily, thank goodness for the Americans in Paris at the time, they were able to get Adrienne and the daughters out of jail. And they were not beheaded. However, Adrienne's mother was guillotined. Adrienne's sister was guillotined. Okay, but Adrienne was escaped with her daughters. But they missed Lafayette very, very much. They wanted to be with Lafayette. If they couldn't free Lafayette, they wanted to be with him. And then something that I can't even express to you in words happened. They joined Lafayette in this terrible place. Adrian, the two daughters, decided after being without their father and husband for 3 years, they would spend the last 2 years with him in jail. And these images are images of them arriving in jail, much to Lafayette's surprise. I will tell you, I promise you, Lafayette did not look this good. He probably didn't even look this good. He was in rags, he was in horrible shape. But they were together finally, still with the 3 coins. Napoleon came to power in France and realized what was happening in Austria and convinced the Austrian king to free Lafayette and the girls. Now, Napoleon said, you free them, but Lafayette, you can't come to France. I'm worried about you being in France. I'm going to get you out of jail, and Lafayette, you just go somewhere else. And he did. He went to the Netherlands for a couple of years. And this is an image of them being freed, and this is the back end of this jail where they were. And on the other side of this wall was the, what do you call it? The sewer system, for lack of a better word. It wasn't much of a system, it was probably just a ditch. So think about it, their windows were outside of this area. And probably Adrian, who you're going to see in a few minutes, died, a young woman, probably died from being in these poor conditions. So Adrian did another thing that was amazing. While they were in the Netherlands, she went to France and tried to piece together all the things they lost. Think about it, Lafayette, everything was taken from him. He became not only from the richest man in France to one of the poorest men in France. He didn't have any holdings whatsoever. But she did. She had this little chateau out of Paris that her family had that they rarely used called La Grange. And she decided that that's where they would live. And they would defy Napoleon and go to La Grange and live out their years. And that's what they did. But unfortunately, whoops, this happened. At 47 years old, she died. Probably of either emphysema or tuberculosis, of some type of lung disease. But Lafayette was crushed. And every day from that point forward, he spent every morning in her bedroom. And making sure that he prayed for her and knew that he was still thinking about her. But this was a very, very, very bad day for Lafayette and the Lafayette family. So Lafayette decided he'd try to get back into politics. He still was now not being taken seriously in France. People didn't know which side he was on. He was maybe a little too liberal for certain people. So things weren't going well for him in this time period of his life. But then he got a letter. He got a letter from President James Monroe of the United States. And James Monroe said, you know what, our country's going through something right now. We're divided, we're going through a very tough election. Sounds familiar, 200 years ago. And then, so he said, why don't you come to America for 3 months and try to heal the country. You're the last living Continental General. Come to our country and tour our country and let the people see you. And he did that. He arrived in New York City on August 16th, 1824, and we were in New York on August 16th, 2024, to a crowd of 90,000 people. And this is Castle Clinton. It's at the very bottom tip of Manhattan. It still exists. In fact, we held an event at Castle Clinton on August 16th, and on July 4th, we're going to hold another event here, because Lafayette was in New York on July 4th, 1825. Sorry, there's a little delay. Okay. All right, let's talk about why I think Lafayette's the first rock star in America. Like I said, when Lafayette came to New York, I said 90,000. This graph says 100. I'm sorry. I said 90,000. This graph says 80,000. So look at this. 80,000 people showed up for Lafayette when he arrived. Only 4,000 people showed up for the Beatles. Look at that difference. Lafayette was truly America's first rock star. When Lafayette was here in America, he was disappointed in our country. He believed when we wrote, all people are created equal. He didn't understand slavery. He didn't understand treating women differently. He didn't understand displacing Native Americans. And when he came here, he was disappointed, but he didn't lecture us about it. He did things. For instance, on October 19th, 1824, he noticed in the crowd when I was giving a speech, James Armistead Lafayette. By the way, James Armistead changed his name to James Lafayette. He noticed him in the crowd, went down the steps, stopped the speech in the middle of the speech, went down the steps, off the dais and gave him a hug. Nobody had ever seen a white man hug a black man before. I don't think that ever happened. People were blown away by this. He treated women as intellectual equals. He didn't understand why your brain is different than my brain. He didn't get that. So he treated you the same. He thought you were just as smart, if not smarter than he was. Consequently, women from all around the country followed Lafayette around the tour. Native Americans, in the middle of a ball, he would just walk out of the ball or some celebration because he got a message from a Native American tribe nearby that wanted to see him. He upset a lot of people, but he was showing them that this was important. And as the American Friends of Lafayette are accentuating this as him as a human rights champion. And this, we're very proud that that's how he conducted himself back 200 years ago. He was only supposed to stay for 3 months. He wasn't supposed to come to Buffalo. But everybody wanted a piece of Lafayette, and he ended up staying for 13 months. 6,000 miles. He saw over 4 million people. He went as far west as St. Louis, as far south as New Orleans, and as far north as Portland, Maine. All 24 states of the Union at the time he went through. We mentioned that one of my favorite things we did recently is we recreated the shipwreck. Lafayette was on a ship on the Ohio River in Indiana, and the ship had snagged, and the ship went down, and he lost a lot of documents, a lot of things, but his next stop was Gallup Police, which is why I'm here, thank you, Gretchen, and we recreated that shipwreck. He slept on the banks of the Ohio River that day. Lafayette saw many, many presidents while I was here. In fact, 10 presidents. I can't name them all, but I'm going to try. He saw these two guys, because they were alive at the time, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. He saw James Madison, James Monroe. He met with future presidents like Zachary Tyler, and Andrew Jackson. He met Taylor, and he also saw George Washington. On October 17th, 1824, probably the most important day of that year for Lafayette, he visited George Washington's tomb in Mount Vernon. He entered the tomb and came out 30 minutes later crying, and then George Washington and his son Lafayette joined him in the tomb, and they spent another 30 minutes in there. We recreated this scene on October 17th, 2024. Just like we did yesterday in front of the Seneca, what is it? Thank you. We were right in front of it. He got out of that boat just like he did 200 years ago. Lafayette's visit here in 1824, 1825 was kind of the birth of the souvenir in our country. Lafayette's image was on everything. Bowls, plates, women's dresses, hats. His least favorite thing was this glove. Women wore gloves with his face on it all the time over there and during that time. And he didn't like that because he didn't like kissing his own face when he kissed their hand. This is the third image I wanted to tell you about today, and I promise we're almost done. I'm running a little long, I apologize. This is the third image. This is the image of what Lafayette would have looked like in 1824. This is probably the best likeness of him then. He loved this portrait of himself. Notice he has a full head of hair, though. That's a toupee. Lafayette was a vain man. And he probably was a little heavier in this area, too, but very handsome photo image, and a very important image, because in the House of Representatives, where the President of the United States gives the State of the Union address, there are only 2 images in that room. Only 2. George Washington and that image of Lafayette right here. So next time you watch the President speak from here, look over his shoulder. There's Lafayette and there's Washington. Think about how our country feels about that. That's a testimony to how we felt Lafayette was important. Lafayette had helped in many other revolutions during his retirement, mostly by writing letters or hiding people in his castle. Poland, Greece, Bolivia, just to name a few, helped with toppling despotism around the world. Well, unfortunately, Lafayette had to pass away eventually, and he did so on May 20th, 1834. He died probably of pneumonia, similar to what George Washington died from as well. John Quincy, the president of the time, asked that we have military honors similar to George Washington. And our country was in mourning for over a month. And it was a very, very big time for our country. And May 20th, 1834 May 20th is a big time for us now going forward. This is where Lafayette is buried in a small cemetery outside of Paris. And I want to explain why that is. So this is Adrian on this side, and this is Lafayette on this side. So think about it. Adrian died many, many years later, and she chose to be buried here. And on the other side of this wall, she discovered is where her aunt and her mother were buried after they were beheaded. So the way they did it back then is when somebody was guillotined, they were thrown in a mass grave. And that mass grave was on the other side of this wall. So she chose to be buried here, and Lafayette, of course, wanted to be buried next to her. What do we see here? Yet another American flag. That flag's been flying over that grave since the 1930s as well. Even when Hitler took over Paris, he let that flag alone. He did not touch it. Every July 4th, I'm trying to hit it. There we go. We have a ceremony that changes the flag. The French ambassador comes. The American ambassador comes. The French military, American military. The American Friends of Lafayette are there. Daughters of the American Revolution are there. Sons of the American Revolution are there. And it's a very wonderful ceremony. We change the American flag that flies over Lafayette's grave. Now, this is my second to last slide. This is personally my favorite statue of Lafayette because it's with George Washington. And this is the genesis of my relationship with Lafayette. And there's two of these in the world, one in New York City near Columbia University, and there's another one in Paris, and they're exactly the same. And these were done by Di Bartoli, the same guy that did the Statue of Liberty. And they're holding American and French flags and shaking hands, and it's a great statue, so if you're ever in New York or Paris, please look it up. That is my final slide. This is the children's statue. This statue is a very large statue that used to sit outside of the Louvre. It's since been moved to the side of the Seine River. It's a giant statue of Lafayette, and it was made by pennies donated by children around the United States. So it's called the children's statue. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it very much. I'm here for any questions you have.
Where did Lafayette get these ideas? Was it from the 18th century philosophers?
Yes, Voltaire. Obviously, a lot of Lafayette's friends, and Lafayette read Voltaire and the other writers of those days that talked about equality and things like that. Yes, he was definitely influenced by that. That's a good question. So yeah, that's something I should include in my PowerPoint. Thank you. More questions? Yes, sir.
Could you say a little bit more about Lafayette tour in this area? And you know,
Yeah.
you landed where he landed, you're down in Buffalo and so forth.
So he came up the Mississippi River. Think about this: the highway of the day of those days was the rivers. I mean, that's where people got around. Mount Vernon, the front door is facing the Potomac, not facing the road. So the river was how people got around, and that's how Lafayette got around, specifically on the western half of his tour, through the river system of our country. Canals weren't ready yet, railroad wasn't around yet. So we're going up the Mississippi, he goes to St. Louis, and he cuts over on the Ohio. He gets an invitation to lay the cornerstone at the Bunker Hill Monument. Now, the Battle of Bunker Hill took place in 1775, so Lafayette wasn't in America then, but he was in America now. And the organizers of this monument, and you go there today, it's a giant obelisk there on the top of that hill. You go there today, and but he wanted to lay that cornerstone. And he got this invitation, and he realized that he was running behind. He had to be in Boston by June 17th. So he realized he's running behind a little bit. So he starts speeding things up. And the shipwreck didn't help him much because he lost a couple of days that day. In fact, there was one, I can't remember the town, but there was one town he didn't visit because of the shipwreck. Be that as it may, he was in a hurry. And Marietta, when he got to Marietta, Ohio, he didn't even get off the boat. He kind of waved at everybody and kept going. But when he came to Buffalo, this was an important place because there was a French influence here. He wanted to make sure that he connected with the French that were here because there was a significant French population here. So we did spend significant, I think, 3 days in this area, not only meeting with French friends and citizens, but also meeting with Native Americans and whatnot, because that was another important part of this area. He moves east now. He's going to go to Auburn, Syracuse, then Schenectady. Okay, and again, the Native Americans were a very important part of this time of the tour between Buffalo and Schenectady. Schenectady, I think, is in Oneida County. Think about that for a second. So he definitely wanted to be there. But he was kind of moving a little more quickly, and he did get to the Bunker Hill Monument by June 17th. And we will be at the Bunker Hill Monument this year, June 17th, to rededicate that laying of the cornerstone that he did. Very interesting thing, when he, I'm going off topic. When he laid the cornerstone that day, he noticed they were building this giant obelisk, so they were digging deep into the earth, right? And he noticed mounds of dirt everywhere. And he said to somebody, could you do me a favor and put some of that dirt into a giant box, a giant crate? I want to take it back to France with me. Why do you think he wanted that dirt? He's buried in American soil. I have goosebumps telling you that. He's buried in American soil. Okay, more questions? Yes, ma'am.
How long was he in the Netherlands and where?
Good question. I don't know exactly where, ma'am. It's not, I didn't study that part of it, but he was there for 2 years. I don't know exactly where. I know it wasn't Amsterdam or The Hague or anything like that, but I don't know where. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll give you my card. I'll look it up for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Didn't he meet Red Jacket?
He did meet Red Jacket. In fact, last night at our ball in Buffalo at the Lafayette Hotel, Red Jacket made an appearance. So Red Jacket was there last night. We recreated Lafayette's inner talk or time with Red Jacket last night at the ball, and we're doing that again. I think on Sunday. I think Sunday we're having another Red Jacket, but that's a very good question.
Are you doing it at the History Museum?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They have a Red Jacket Award every year.
Maybe that's where we're doing it. I'm sorry. But I know we have another one coming up this weekend, another Red Jacket program. So,
And did he speak in what is now Lafayette Square?
yes. And we were at Lafayette Square yesterday. And there's a marker at Lafayette Square indicating Lafayette's being there. So you should go see that marker. It's very nice.
Wonderful talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thanks.